Welcome, everybody. We're going to jump right in, as I mentioned, because we want to make the best use of your time. Thank you again for joining us for this session. I'm just adjusting the screen here. My name is Catherine Squires-Basson, and I'm the Director of Culture and Community here at Proline Management and one of our stewardship team members. We have a team here of 56 people right now, including administration, accounting, and operations teams, in addition to our property managers, two of whom are here today presenting to you. We had an absolutely fantastic response to the invitation for this, with over 400 people registered, which is really fantastic. Thank you for demonstrating an interest in learning about how your Strata Corporation works. We also have people from stratas all over Vancouver Island and from all different kinds of stratas. So high rise, low rise, new, old, townhouses, you're all here today. That means that the information that we're going over today is going to be general to how all strata corporations in BC are supposed to operate. We do hope to have time to address specific questions at the end of the session, but we will not likely be able to address questions that are specific to your unique strata. So if you have questions after the session that are specific, please reach out to your strata council or your property manager or us if you don't have that contact information, and we can connect you with the right people. Also, as mentioned in the invitation, this session is being recorded. So there are a lot of people who have reached out and aren't able to be here in person during this time. That's why we record everything. We will send the recording out to everybody who's registered, and then you can share it from there if you want to share it with other people that you know. We'll also be sharing some of the documents that we look at here in the presentation, so you'll have those to refer to as well. And that's enough for me. I'm going to turn the stage over to Kristy Tamburri and Dario and Anselmo, two of our experienced and knowledgeable property managers. So Kristy is also one of our managing brokers and one of the managers of our Strata department, has been a property manager for nearly 12 years now. And Dario is one of our supervisors and a key trainer for our Strata department, has been a property manager for 5 years. So I'm going to pass it along to Kristy to go from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Catherine. My name is Kristy Tamburri, and I'm going to be taking us through today's nuts and bolts session with Dario. I'm so sorry. I'm getting over a bug, and so I don't sound as my normal self, but I am here and ready to rock and roll. So first, we're just going to touch on today's topic and kind of what we're speaking to. We'll first talk about Proline representatives, and ultimately what the team looks like and how we are here to help your Strata Corporation. We'll have an overview of how Strata Corporations generally work. We'll try to understand how Strata Corporations make decisions, and we'll also review some basic processes and procedures that generally Strata corporations adopt. So in saying that, we will start with the Proline family as it is. Proline Management was founded back in 1985 by Eric Sperling. So we are coming up to our 40th anniversary this year, which is really exciting. For those of you that know Andy Sperling, he joined the team in 2007. And fast forwarding from there to 2022, Eric retired and 5 long-term employees joined the team as owners. And so Proline is still very much locally owned. We have a focus on stewardship, building up our people internally and in turn in the larger community as a whole. We currently manage over 13,000 units between the Strata department and the rental division. A little bit more about Proline before we jump into Strata corporations. Our overall organizational purpose is helping people live and grow together, and we love working with clients that ultimately share that goal. We can do so much when we work together to accomplish our goals, and so we just want to put that out there. That is how we ultimately operate. We've also based and developed paradigms to go hand in hand with that purpose. And we like to think that we're a little bit different, maybe a little bit weird. And so if you look at the paradigms it's themselves, rebellious optimism, wholehearted togetherness, radical transparency, insidious joy, and relentless incrementalism, they're basically concepts that internally guide us and our team in terms of how we want to operate and how we want to provide services in the community. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Dario, who's actually going to jump now right into the topic.
Yes, well, almost. So, why are we doing this as a whole? So, part of our role as Proline, something we want to do is to be what we like to call internally as your trusted advisors. So, we're here to help you. Your Strata has likely hired us to help with your management, but ultimately these are your communities. They're not our communities, they're your buildings. And we want to educate you so that you're confident in yourselves as councils and as owners and residents and members of the Strata communities. So we do a lot of these different sessions. We do this one, we do one on reading our Strata Council Manual, which is an in-depth look about how Strata councils operate, financial reporting, so in-depth on finances, bylaws, creating council community ambassadors. This is what we call the nuts and bolts session. So we're going to do a little bit on each of these, but look to our past sessions and future sessions for more in-depth looks at each of these specific topics. And again, this isn't just about educating council members. We believe that stratas work best when there's transparency and knowledge for all residents, where all residents are in the know about what's going on and why. Not only because that helps the community move forward harmoniously, but also at the end of the day, all residents are potential future Strata Council members or volunteers. Everyone can be contributing now or in the future. So we hope that everybody takes that opportunity to get informed. So stratas are complicated, as many people are aware, and it's not just because of all the regulations and maintenance responsibilities. It's also complicated because it's a community. In a technical sense, the owners of a strata are business partners who own an investment together, but we all know that's not the reality of how most stratas operate. They're homes. The people live in them. The people next door are your neighbors. There are too many personal stakes and emotions involved for everyone in the strata to be simply treating the strata like it's a business. It's not. It operates technically like a business, but in reality, it's a community where we all live. So this dynamic brings many opportunities for residents. Serving on a strata council can be an interesting and rewarding way to contribute to your community. Those who don't feel like they have the time or energy or interest in serving on a strata council can still get involved in a lot of different ways by volunteering to help with maybe one or two specific tasks or committees. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but something as simple as being the one who organizes bottle drives or organizes a summer barbecue where everyone gets together. Heavy volunteerism, resident ambassadors who greet new residents and show them around the building, social events, recycling groups. These things can all help build community, make sure that everyone kind of knows each other and everyone understands who their neighbors are. Really brings a lot to the table when it comes to the technical side of things, when you actually have that community mindset already. I'm going to turn it now back to Kristy to answer the main question that I think we're all wondering. Kristy, what is a strata? What's a strata?
Thanks, Dario. So a strata corporation is essentially a collective of owners that have purchased into the strata to reside together or provide housing. And so strata corporations in the province of British Columbia are governed by provincial legislation and regulations. Every strata corporation has a strata plan that is essentially a sketch of what the property looks like, and it designates property, whether that property belongs to the strata corporation collectively to all of the owners, whether the property belongs to a particular strata lot owner, And so all of that is outlined on the strata plan. Every strata corporation also has a set of bylaws. Sometimes those bylaws at the onset of a strata corporation's new beginning and formation are standard and set based on the standard bylaws the provincial government it has included within the Strata Property Act. And but more often than not, as a strata community grows, you learn what your community ultimately wants in terms of bylaws, and you adopt and form those bylaws to fit your community. In addition to those bylaws, your strata corporation may have rules. Rules are similar to bylaws in that they prescribe and set standards for behavior. However, rules are a little bit easier to adopt in that strata councils can adopt them during their typical fiscal year, and then owners ratify those rules at each general meeting. We'll also touch on the Civil Resolution Tribunal, or the CRT, which was developed and introduced by the provincial government to ultimately resolve disputes within strata communities a little bit easier or quicker than going through the court system. So breaking it down from there, the Strata Property Act is the legislation. It is the Bible that creates and governs strata corporations. It is always the document that we go back to essentially determine and glean where the strata corporation and council gets their authority. The Strata Property Act must be read with the strata property regulations and the standard bylaws in combination. They essentially stack upon one another, and so one cannot be read and understood without the others. And so it's important to understand that that Strata Property Act does have that strata property regulation document. I think many strata council members are unaware of that, and so it's important to be aware of that because there are intricacies within the statutory legislation, and so read it, but be cautious because, of course, in true legislative form, the Strata Property Act is not always easily interpreted. But essentially, it is the governing structure for strata corporations. And as I said, briefly touching on the Civil Resolution Tribunal, the CRT was introduced back in 2016. It's an online tribunal. It's the first of its kind in the country, and it was essentially introduced to attempt to resolve strata disputes between owners in the strata corporation, and even sometimes between residents and owners within a strata corporation without going through the process of an actual court case. And so all members that are represented within a civil resolution tribunal claim represent themselves. As I said, it's online. The entry fee, or the claim fee to post the claim, is $125. So essentially the point of the system is not to be scary, not to be cost prohibitive so that it's impossible to resolve a dispute with a strata corporation. And it's a tool that is an option to avoid going to court. And so it's often a quicker avenue to resolve a resolution, particularly if you can resolve a dispute before it gets to kind of the end decision where an arbitrator has to decide. There is a portion where mediation and settlement is encouraged. And so if you can get your dispute resolved before it gets to the very end, then you're definitely going to get a resolution before you would in a court. However, since its inception, the CRT has become very popular, as you can imagine. And so it is a lengthy process to go through now, and probably I would estimate anywhere between a year to 2 years if you're going the full distance of a claim through to a final decision. Okay, Dario.
All
I'm
right.
gonna throw it back to you.
All right. So every part of your strata is generally going to fall into one of three categories. The common property is what you as owners own together in common. That includes the landscaping, the hallways, the roof. Sometimes it's going to be something you use more than others. For example, if you're on the first floor, the grass around your back door, your back patio might be something that you use more than others. Or it could be something you never use. Again, if you're on the first floor, you may never use the elevator. But regardless, you all own a share of that common property. And the Strata Corporation, the main reason it exists is to help manage your shared ownership of that common property. Limited common property is still common property, but it's common property that's been assigned to a specific unit to use. So a common example is going to be a parking space that's essentially attached to the unit and transfers with sale. The ultimate responsibility for necessary repairs of the limited common property, it's going to depend on your bylaws and what the repairs are. But, generally, if we're talking about a parking stall, if the concrete that makes up that parking stall needs to be fixed, that's still going to be the Strata's responsibility because, again, it's still common property. It's still ultimately owned by the Strata, and so the owners as a whole. And the ultimate authority about alterations to that stall, for example, installing an electric vehicle charger, again, is still going to be the Strata because that's still the Strata's property. Just because a parking stall or a backyard is assigned to your unit as limited common property, it doesn't make it yours. Backyards are another area of confusion where people often think that they can do whatever they want in their backyard. But if you look at the Strata plan and see that it's a limited common property space, that is actually still the Strata's property. It's just the Strata's property that's been assigned for your use. So it's good to be aware of that. And then, of course, we have the strata lots. So generally, these are called, and even I subconsciously just now kept calling them a unit. A unit is generally what the common parlance is, but it's technically called a strata lot. And this is the interior of the space that you own. This is the space that you own 100% of. Everything in there is your responsibility. The furniture, the appliances, those are all owned by you, not the Strata Corporation. And on the next slide here, we've got an example of a strata plan. So this is the legal document filed with the province that defines what is common property and what is a strata lot. So the strata lots, you'll see them along the bottom. They're listed as SL for strata lot and then a number. The numbers are going to be different from your unit number because there are many stratas, for example, that have 2 buildings and each building has a unit 101. So we need a way to differentiate what unit 101 we're talking about. Every unit's got its own unique strata lot number. I've also highlighted the boundaries of Strata Lot 5 in green here. You'll notice that there's no detailing of the interior walls of the strata lot. The strata plan is not a floor plan. It's not an architectural drawing. Its main purpose is just to define where does your property end and the common property begins. So everything inside that boundary is the strata lot, and everything outside of that boundary is not the strata lot. Now in red at the bottom there, you'll see the deck for Strata Lot 5. In this case, in this strata, not all stratas, but in this strata, the decks are limited common property. And so this one is listed as LCP for limited common property. So LCP SL5, limited common property for Strata Lot 5. And then finally, you'll have the common property. On a strata plan, everything that isn't specifically listed as being SL for strata lot or LCP for limited common property, it's common property by default. If you can't tell what something is, it's probably common property. But many strata plans, more modern strata plans, will put a C there for common property. I've marked at the top there the blue area, which is the parking stalls. So the parking area is common property. Again, like with interior walls to a strata lot, you'll notice that there's no individual parking stalls noted there. Again, the strata plan isn't interested in being a detailed map of the building. It's there to define what is common property, what isn't. So we just know that all the parking stalls in that area are common property. If they were limited common property, then they would have each individual stall drawn out just because they would have to be labeled which unit they're assigned to. In the space of limit of it being common property, again, we just know those stalls are all common property, and the strata will probably have bylaws around how those are assigned to specific units or how many exist. All right, shifting gears slightly, here's a question everyone wants to know. How are my strata fees determined? Literally got this question in my inbox this morning after I'd already written this section out. People ask me, I was at the AGM. I don't remember voting on what my strata fees will be. Why am I getting charged these strata fees? You don't generally directly vote on what your strata fees will be in terms of there isn't a vote at the AGM that goes, and here are the strata fees, let's vote on that. What you vote on is the budget, and then the strata fees are part of the budget. Now, before I get to the next part, I just want to clarify something called unit entitlement. A very basic thing, but again, we're here to discuss the basic things. Unit entitlement is essentially what percentage of the strata your strata lot is responsible for. So this is usually based on the habitable area of the unit. Bigger units are responsible for more of the strata. But sometimes, particularly in townhouse complexes, everyone's unit entitlement is going to be equal. Regardless, the unit entitlement is going to work out to something like, just to put it simply, unit 101 is responsible for 2% of the strata corporation's income. So what that means is you go to the AGM, you vote on the budget. That budget is included total dollar amount that the strata is going to raise for strata fees for the year. And what happens then is that amount is divided between the units based on unit entitlement. So you've voted on a budget. The budget says that the strata needs to raise $100,000 in strata fee income this year. So just by virtue of having voted that, a unit that has 2% of the unit entitlement, the strata fees are going to be 2% of that strata fee income in the budget. So this process is laid out in the Strata Property Act. It can be changed, but it requires a unanimous vote of all owners to do so. So it's not very practical to change it. Again, generally what's going to happen is that council is going to propose to the owners a budget that's going to cover all of the strata's operational and maintenance expenses, all of its administrative expenses, and its contribution to the contingency reserve fund for the year. Owners vote on approving that budget, and then by approving that budget, everyone has implicitly approved the strata fees, because the strata fees are just what have been calculated as needed from each unit to fund all those things that owners just approved. Speaking about budgets on the next slide, so we work with the strata councils to create a budget for your community. These are things that your community has to pay for, either regularly ongoing expenses like snow clearing, window cleaning, insurance, or the other big thing is the contribution to the contingency reserve fund, which isn't immediate spending, but it's saving up for major expenses. If Catherine just kind of opens this up here, again, we've got a whole session to go onto these in detail. I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. The very top row there under income says strata assessments. That's where you can see the total strata fees that are being raised for the year. Again, that's divided up per unit to make the strata fees. You can see we've got 4 columns in our statements. This is just based on our Proline's reporting. The first column there that says current actual, that's the spending for this strata this month. Year-to-date actual is the total spending for the year. And then annual budget is the budgeted amount. And finally, we've got what was the spending at this time last year, just so you can compare, particularly for utilities and stuff like that, where are we compared to last year? And then if you go all the way to the bottom of this section, you'll see an area called closing fund balance. And that is, again, the closing balance at the end of the month, the closing balance for this time this year. That is the actual amount of money in the Strata's bank account as of the end of the month that this report is for. So we use, Proline uses what's called a cash accounting system. We use this system because it's what most people would use if you are making your own budget for your own homes. So it's what most lay people would understand, what most people understand. It is simply a record of how much money you have and how much money you've spent. Simple as that. This system, cash accounting, allows most owners to understand with the maximum transparency where their money is coming from, where it's gone, and how much money do you actually have in the bank right now. Another important thing to know for stratas is depreciation reports. So these were introduced by the province of British Columbia a little over 10 years ago now, and they're mandatory for most stratas. I think it's every strata of 4 or more units. So that's most stratas. If you have to you have to update your depreciation report now every 5 years. Most of you probably remember that it was a little bit more complicated than that. There used to be a ability to vote at AGMs to defer if it was every 3 years. All of that has been taken away. It's now simply you have to renew it at least every 5 years, or every 5 years at most. You can renew it more often than that, but if it's more than 5 years old, you have to get a new one. And at its simplest, it's just a rundown of all the major common property components that the Strata is responsible for maintaining, and some financial recommendations on how to build your contingency reserve fund so that you can pay for that maintenance. So it's going to list, your roof, the windows, the concrete, the foundations of the building, and it's going to give the average lifespans of those things. And it's going to give a estimated cost for repairing those things, and then calculate how much money you should be saving up into your contingency reserve fund so you can pay for that, or when, if you don't have enough saved up, when you can expect to need special levies to pay for that. Now, you're never going to follow your depreciation report exactly, and you shouldn't try to. The depreciation report might say your roof has 5 years left, but again, that's just based on an average lifespan of that kind of roof. You'll go to your roofing company, and your roofing contractor is going to tell you that it actually needs to be replaced now. Or, knock on wood, a better scenario, the depreciation report says 5 years, but your roofing contractor says it has 10 years left. The depreciation report is just going on the average lifespan. It's not there to tell you do this in this exact year, but it's a helpful reminder when you see that roof renewal coming up. That's when it's time to go to the roofer and to do that more in-depth look at what does the roofer recommend. And again, with the foundations, the depreciation report says our foundations are coming up for renewal. Now's the time to get an engineer to look at our foundations and go more in depth on what exactly the plan needs to be there. So it's a great tool for you to reference at budget meetings. It's something that you should probably review with your property manager once a year, perhaps even a few months before the budget meeting, so that when you're planning for the year, you can get a couple quotes and know what you're going to be talking about in the budget meeting. It's a great tool. It's something that, should be reviewed once a year, not stressed about too much, because again, it's not setting in stone exactly what you're going to be doing. It's a list of recommendations so you don't miss anything. Its main intent, I think, is so that stratas don't forget about, oh, we need to be looking at the structure of the building, or, oh, we need to be making sure the waterproof membrane. We've all got a million things to balance in our heads when it comes to managing stratas. So the depreciation report is just a helpful reminder of all the different maintenance responsibilities the strata has to balance. So that is a lot of very technical stuff that I just went over. Lots of talking about strata plans and financial reports and depreciation reports. So now I'm going to turn it back to Kristy to talk more about the people side of how stratas operate.
Yes. So we've talked a bunch about tools, and all of those tools are generated and moved by people. So let's talk about the people. Every strata corporation, as we said, is a community. Every community looks different. Your strata corporation is going to look a little bit different than even your strata corporation next door, which may have a very similar build. Ultimately, there are many, many faces to a community, including those that reside in it, whether it's owners and tenants. And then you have council members, you have a part of your community, and we like to think we're a part of your community, your strata property manager. You may also have employees of the strata corporation. So your strata may employ a caretaker or a site manager. You may have internal janitorial staff, or you may engage contractors that provide janitorial services. You, as a strata corporation, also rely on professionals. So going back to the example of the depreciation report, you may rely on engineers to put together and commission that report. You may, over the course of the strata corporation's lifespan, you may need a lawyer. That is not uncommon. So that's another person who kind of plays a role in the Strata Corporation's life cycle, as well as all of the trades that are responsible for helping the Strata Council to ensure that the building or buildings or whatever your Strata Corporation looks like is well taken care of in terms of maintenance. Going beyond that, and kind of focusing a little bit more on the internal governance of the Strata Corporation, your Strata Council is your group of owners elected, your group of volunteers. And I think that emphasis is really important. And I'm sure that all of you here present appreciate that, but your Strata Council are volunteers elected by owners at the annual general meeting. So these are people that are not paid. They're taking their personal time and putting it to the greater good of your community. They make decisions on behalf of the Strata Corporation. And in the case of a Strata Council working with professional property management like Proline, you will also have a Strata Property Manager who generally assists with admin tasks, financial and accounting functions like managing your invoice payments and ensuring that you get those operating statements. We provide advice and act as your trusted advisor for the Strata Corporation. Basically, the way that each Strata Council operates can be very different, but essentially the relationship with the Strata Property Management Company is generally pretty consistent. And so we're here to help. Moving on from there, the Strata Council is responsible for electing at least 4 executive positions. The Strata Property Act requires that a Strata Council has a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. Those roles can be amalgamated. So, for example, it's fairly common for a council member to take on the role of secretary treasurer. And that's particularly the case for professionally managed Strata corporations, because generally speaking, your Strata property manager and support team behind that property manager are taking care of the vast majority of the admin and financial tasks. And so the roles of treasurer and secretary are downplayed a little bit. The 2 roles that cannot be amalgamated are the president and vice president, because the vice president is expected to act in the event that the president cannot. So it's important that those be 2 separate people. Anyone on a Strata Council that does not hold an executive role is considered a member at large. There's also one other position that the Strata Council must fill, and this is a requirement of the Strata Property Act. The Strata Council must have someone elected as the privacy officer. The privacy officer essentially is a little bit more educated on privacy as it relates to Strata corporations, and typically is the go-to person in the event a privacy situation or a privacy breach has come up. That person will act as kind of the expert. However, having said that, generally speaking, and particularly with Strata corporations that Proline manages, we have a ton of literature on privacy and Strata corporations, and we're here to help. And so in the event any privacy issue ever did arise, we would help the privacy officer and the council to wade through and figure out how best to manage that situation. It's also really important to note that there are other options for positions that council members could potentially fill, but also just members of your Strata community can fill. And so generally those are typically referred to as committee roles. And you don't necessarily have to be on the Strata Council to sit on a committee. Ultimately, committees are a great way to delegate some tasks to other residents in the Strata community that are passionate about particular topics. And so if I know that there is someone down the hall that really gets excited to throw social events, then I might ask Barb, hey, Barb, do you want to take the lead on the social committee? And that social committee can come up with ideas and make proposals to the Strata Council that ultimately the Strata Council can consider and approve. And so those committees don't necessarily have any authority to act or spend money. However, the Strata Council can receive recommendations and act on those recommendations, and then delegate further tasks to the committee. So it's just another great way of getting people that aren't necessarily right in on the Strata Council involved in Strata activity. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about meetings. So there are generally two types of formal meetings within a Strata corporation. First are general meetings. You can either call them, there's two essentially, the annual general meeting, which is exactly that, happens once a year. And it's probably one of the most important tasks and certainly the most important meeting that a Strata corporation will have each year. The most important thing that occurs, or there's really two functions of the AGM. The AGM is where owners come together to approve your budget so that you know your Strata fees and you have budgets to work within for the next fiscal year. It's also where you elect your Strata council. So it's where owners come together, share ideas, and then elect that council who goes off and implements the direction of the owners. Beyond that, annual general meetings also offer an opportunity to ratify any new rules that were adopted by the Strata Council over the last fiscal year. It's also where owners can amend bylaws of the Strata Corporation. So going back to the standard bylaws, if you've got the set of standard bylaws and you really want to blend your own unique community values into those bylaws, you would bring them forward at that annual general meeting for consideration and adoption by the owners. And it's also where you authorize expenditures. So going back to Dario's spiel about the depreciation report, if you're coming up due to your depreciation report, the perfect opportunity to have the owners authorize that expenditures at the annual general meeting. And specifically around the special general meetings, a special general meeting is essentially just a general meeting called outside of the AGM. And it really can tackle any of the needs of the Strata Corporation. So for example, you could be amending bylaws at a special general meeting. You could be authorizing additional expenditures at a special general meeting. You could even be electing new council members at a special general meeting if it was necessary. But these special general meetings are called outside of that AGM, and they typically are called to address one or two specific items that need to be addressed before the next AGM. General meetings in general are for owners. Owners may attend and participate throughout the entirety of the meeting, and Strata corporations can hold those meetings either in person or electronically, say via Zoom. And then outside of those annual general meetings, once you have your elected council, your council is meeting regularly, having duly convened Strata Council meetings. And so they are reviewing operating statements on a monthly basis. They are actioning items, determining expenditures within the budget. So for example, your dryer vent cleaning might be done every other year. And so your Strata Council is discussing that and determining when to set that schedule. They're reviewing any correspondence received. They're enforcing the bylaws. They're doing a plethora of things on a regular basis. But when I say that your Strata Council meets regularly, it may not be the same for every Strata corporation. You may have a Strata corporation that meets quarterly because there's not a lot of business. You may have a Strata Council that meets every 2 months, or you may have a Strata Council that meets monthly. It's entirely dependent on the structure of your strata and the needs of your corporation. And generally, owners typically are able to attend Strata Council meetings to kind of take in the action, but that is based on bylaw. So your Strata Corporation would have to have a bylaw that allows observers to attend. But in saying that, you would be attending as an owner to observe only. And so generally, there's no participation by owners in council meetings. Now, moving forward, as I said, the Strata Council discusses a variety of topics within their meetings. And generally, we like to try to encourage a decision process. And this is to support ensuring that consistency is maintained. And it also protects Strata Corporation and the council against
Sorry, guys, Kristy just paused there. So I'm going to just hold on for a second and wait until hopefully she comes back. Are you going to give it a second? I'll touch base with Dario.
I was very sure that was me. I was like, oh no, my whole thing.
No, that's Kristy. Do you want to here?
Sure. Do you want to move on to the next slide?
Sure, you can come back here. We'll move on to the next slide and we can circle back if Kristy comes back. So give me a second. There we go.
Okay, thanks everyone. So, not unrelated to what Kristy was just saying, rules and bylaws are going to help govern a lot of the decisions that councils are making. So rules and bylaws govern what people are or are not allowed to do in the strata, and it governs how the strata needs to be repaired and maintained and what everyone's responsibilities are. So these things are intended to ensure that everyone lives as harmoniously as possible as a community, that everyone's aware of their responsibilities, and that people are made responsible if they're not living up to their responsibilities, if they cause damage to the building itself. I won't break down everything about rules and bylaws here. Again, we've got a whole hour-long academy session on that. But one of council's primary jobs is to enforce the bylaws. Generally, the go-to people think in their head is probably something like a noise bylaw, enforcing, when people are submitting noise complaints. But things such as the strata must maintain the landscaping is also a bylaw. And it's the strata council's responsibility to decide how to enforce these bylaws. And while council can delegate a lot of the administrative and financial tasks to a management brokerage like Proline, the one thing council cannot delegate is enforcing the bylaws. You can't delegate it to us as property managers. You can't delegate it to a committee. You can't delegate it to one specific member of council. When it comes to issuing fines, for the biggest example, you cannot issue fines without all of council voting on that officially as a council. You cannot delegate out the strata's power to enforce fines. When enforcing bylaws in disputes between two residents, I'd note that council's responsibility is to find the reasonable solution between two units. Often the reasonable solution isn't just finding a unit $200 a week until they give up or move out. It can be about finding a compromise. So if a unit causes a lot of noise when they're doing their exercises in the bedroom, can they put down a rug, or can they move and do their exercises in the living room instead? If a resident is smoking on the balcony and that smoke is getting into their neighbor's kitchen, can they just smoke on the other side of the balcony? These are real scenarios that I've guided my clients through that were solved way more effectively than simply issuing fines and telling the person who's doing the bad thing to just figure it out, or else you're getting fined. Suggesting these kinds of solutions, active solutions that people can take can really help when two residents are not able to come to an agreement themselves. And be aware as well that council's power and responsibilities end where the bylaws end. There is a tendency for residents to want council to solve every issue that happens on the strata property. But when things extend beyond the bylaws, for example, if something is just illegal, those issues are often best addressed by the police or whatever law enforcement agency is responsible. Welcome, Kristy. Shall I just keep going?
So sorry. Apparently my laptop feels as sick as I do. I think I was just touching on the process, the decision process. Yeah. And so I can quickly go through. But essentially, we encourage councils to adopt some kind of decision process that is consistent. And so this is a great example here of having an issue, determining the process and procedure to follow, and ensuring that it's clear, simple, and understood by all of the Strata Council, and determining a decision that's reasonable, consistent, and timely, and kind of following those concepts. It supports decisions around significant unfairness and protects the Strata Corporation and the Strata Council against potential disputes, whether it's legally or within the CRT. So sorry to interrupt, sorry to disappear. I will throw it back to you, Dario, to keep going.
No, that's great. Glad to have you back. So speaking of decisions, here we've got a flow chart for how the bylaw enforcement process kind of runs to try to help demystify that and help council make effective decisions in how to enforce the bylaws. So we've got it all laid out here. This is going to be made available to anyone who's interested after the recording, as well as some other documents. So don't try to squint too hard to feel like you got to read it all now, or we will send it out. This does allow you to kind of follow along with the process works. If you get stuck, you can find where you are in the process and go from there. But the thing I'll hit home is that a strata cannot fine a person without first giving that person the opportunity to respond and defend themselves. It doesn't matter how obvious it is to council that the person is responsible for doing the thing. Everyone is entitled to the opportunity to defend themselves and give their side of the story before they are fined. So again, don't be itchy to find someone. Let them give their side of the story, see if there's a compromise that you can find with them, and then you can vote to find them. It can take a few weeks to go from the complaint being made to the fine actually being applied, but it ensures the person had the opportunity to defend themselves, and it ensures the fines will stick if the person refuses to pay them. If a person goes to the CRT and they weren't given the opportunity to defend themselves, the CRT is just going to declare the fines invalid and throw them out. You may hear about something called a continuing contravention. A continuing contravention is something where you can apply the fine over and over again without having to go through the process from the beginning each time if the person hasn't stopped. But this is a lot more rare than people often assume. A valid continuing contravention would be like somebody built a deck outside of their strata lot that they didn't have permission to build, and every week that deck still exists. The strata can fine $200 a week, for example, without needing to give the owner a chance every week to defend the fact that they built a deck without permission. That's a continuing contravention. If though a unit is having a party every night and they're getting noise complaints every night, that is not a continuing contravention. Those are separate instances. They're all separate parties. They're separate noise complaints. You have to treat each complaint as a new complaint and give the person the opportunity to defend themselves against each accusation before you levy fines. Just because that unit was having the loud party the last 9 times, it might not have been them the 10th time. It might have been a neighbor who realized that because that unit is partying so much, they can fly one under the radar and point, make that other unit take the fall. That's an extreme example, but again, the purpose of this is to allow all residents the opportunity to defend themselves against a strata council that has piling up complaints against them. And again, for this reason, sometimes bylaw enforcement is not the most appropriate way to deal with things. Often it can feel like a lot of red tape to go through this whole process. So consider if maybe that there's a more efficient way to deal with things. Sometimes an issue is so small, instead of going through the whole bylaw enforcement process, it is better to just say to someone like, hey, what's the compromise we can come out to here? Again, if your smoking bothers someone, can you just smoke somewhere else in the house, 5 feet to the left? Sometimes that's all it takes without going through this whole process. On the other side, some things are so big that this process becomes too cumbersome. For example, I have people saying to me, my neighbor makes me feel unsafe because they threaten me. The truth is that the most council can do in that case is go through, a month-long process to fine $200. If you feel unsafe now, in your home because of something someone else is doing, again, it's probably more appropriate that that get handled by police, legal authorities, someone who's set up more to deal with that scope of problem. Going on now to some responsibilities for privacy. So be aware that stratas are responsible for provincial and federal privacy laws. These are not detailed in the Strata Property Act, but they do apply to stratas. There are some good reading materials that help us disseminate what parts of these laws apply to stratas. And some stratas adopt privacy policies, which help outline to owners what considerations are being undertaken, though it's not necessary for a strata to have a privacy policy. And if you don't, you are still subject to these laws. So a big one to be aware of is that your name and your mailing address are records of the Strata Corporation. And so those are actually not private from other owners. Other owners are entitled to know your name and how they can contact you by letter. However, other personal contact information, such as your phone number, are private, and stratas should not be sharing phone numbers without the explicit permission of residents. I think the question that comes up most often with clients I've worked with, the privacy question that comes up is security cameras. Either council wants to install security cameras or owners want to install them. Particularly in townhouse complexes, I find a lot of people want to have those doorbell cameras. The big lesson I can impart here from multiple CRT cases and documents I've read is that stratas should not have security cameras or allow owners to install security cameras unless there is a bylaw in the strata that allows security cameras to exist on strata property. This is kind of a weird one because normally bylaws tell you what you're not allowed to do, and everything else, if it's not listed in the bylaws, is permitted. For example, am I allowed to have a barbecue? Is there a bylaw saying that I can't have a barbecue? No, then by default, I am allowed to have a barbecue. Cameras, it's the opposite. With privacy legislation, the default is really no cameras. But then by passing the bylaw, that is the owners giving that permission for them, for, you know, the common property to be recorded. That is advising everyone who reads the bylaws, hey, if you move into this strata, you have the potential to be recorded. So those bylaws allowing owners to decide what level of surveillance is going to be allowed in the strata, and having a lawyer help you draft those bylaws is really going to help make sure that you're fulfilling all of your privacy responsibilities around owners or residents or guests being recorded when they're on the strata property. And with that, back to Kristy for some other responsibilities of residents and council members in a strata.
Absolutely. So this is a responsibility of strata council members, and that is to declare conflicts of interest. And the conflicts of interest have the potential to tear strata corporations apart. I have seen it happen. I think what's really important to note around conflicts of interest is that council members should be aware of and declare any conflict of interest, whether it is an actual conflict or just a perceived conflict. Sometimes a perceived conflict of interest is just as complicated, and in order to move through decisions and processes easily, it's a simple process to just declare than to not mention it. And so essentially we want to ensure that councils are making unbiased decisions, are acting fairly on behalf of all owners. And by doing that, you build trust throughout your community. It's important essentially to over declare rather than under declare. And so if you would an example of a conflict of interest is if I was sitting on a strata council and my corporation was looking at doing a painting project, and my brother owns a painting company, and I suggested that we use Ben's painting, and I didn't disclose that Ben was my brother. That would be a conflict that ultimately I should disclose if I'm wanting to suggest that Ben does the painting. So that's one very basic example, but essentially we want to make sure that we are aware of and declaring in all circumstances. Shifting gears a little bit, moving on to maintenance. So the responsibility for maintenance for common property obviously falls to the Strata Corporation, and it is mandated under the Strata Property Act that the Strata Council properly and appropriately maintains the assets of the Strata Corporation. As a result, strata corporations engage many different trades in order to ensure that maintenance is completed. And so it's important, really, and I think particularly on Vancouver Island, the way that contractors and businesses do business on the island is really relationship based. And so building relationships with your contractors is critical in ensuring that you as a strata council are doing your due diligence to get the best work at the best rates. Many strata council members have the opinion that 3 quotes are required for all projects. Ultimately, in many circumstances, that isn't even an option. And so going back to that relationship building and that relationship with your trades, if you're building those relationships, you have trust between you and your window cleaner or your gutter cleaner or the contractor that you call in to replace glass. Building those relationships will ensure that moving forward, you can rely on them for competitive pricing, and you can also rely on them to get to your property quickly in the event of an emergency. It's also important to note that some strata corporations, as I mentioned before, have caretakers or on-site managers or other employees of the strata corporation that also deal with maintenance. And so if you're a strata corporation that does have an employee that is doing that kind of maintenance, that's fantastic. That obviously takes some heat off of the council to ensure that certain maintenance tasks are getting done. It also gives an opportunity for your employee to start building those relationships with those trades on your behalf. Back to you, Dario. Let's talk insurance.
All right. I'm gonna go through this hopefully in good time as we're coming up on the hour mark here. And I'm going to talk about just a brief overview of insurance. Now, I'm not an insurance professional, so I can only touch on the basics here. It's always best to get insurance advice from an insurance broker. And by the same vein, we just noticed a question based on my last section of am I a lawyer? Flattered by the question, I think, but no, I'm not a lawyer. Again, that's why I said when you're getting these bylaws written, do get legal advice. I read CRT cases because they inform me about what what strata should or shouldn't be doing. You as council members or owners can read CRT cases, shore articles, all these informative materials to help us determine how we should be acting. But at the end of the day, we're not lawyers. Property managers aren't lawyers. We're not insurance professionals. We're not engineers or plumbers. We're always just helping direct you to the most appropriate contractors, the most appropriate professionals, the most appropriate sources of this information. That said, we can talk a bit about our expertise and experience, and we can talk about the Strata Property Act. And so when it comes to insurance, the Strata Property Act and regulations require all stratas to have an insurance policy on the original construction of the building. It doesn't cover your personal belongings. It doesn't cover your hotel stay or loss of rental income if the unit's uninhabitable. It doesn't cover alterations. It covers what the original building was and the original fixtures in that building when the developer built it. Now, many people assume that strata insurance protects you from anything that wasn't your fault. And this just simply isn't the case. That's what your personal insurance is for. The strata insurance is to protect you against exorbitant expenses, essentially. So the strata's insurance has a deductible. For example, it might be $25,000 for water damages. If there's more than $25,000 worth of water damage to the strata, then the amount over that is going to be covered, or hopefully will be covered, by the Strata's insurance. And that means that in theory, the most you could personally be responsible for, the maximum cost you could be responsible for, is going to be that deductible. So for example, again, if there's water damage to the Strata and the water damage deductible is $25,000, in theory, the most you'll be responsible for is $25,000 worth of damage. And so you can go to your personal insurance broker and ensure you have coverage on your personal insurance to cover that amount. But again, the only determination about when Strata insurance kicks in is when that deductible is reached, and owners are still going to be responsible for paying that deductible amount. So it doesn't come down to if, you know, a common property pipe leaks into my unit, that means that the Strata insurance is going to pay for it. That's not the case. If an owner's unit leaks, you know, your neighbor's unit leaks into your unit, Strata insurance isn't going to have any say in that. Your insurance might go after your neighbor's insurance to subrogate the costs, but that's going to have nothing to do with the Strata. That's going to be between you and your personal insurance broker to go through that process. And on the next slide, we have something that we will also be sending out after this. This is another flow chart about insurance claims. Again, this details what I was just saying, and this comes from the Condominium Homeowners Association, so you know I'm not making it up. If there is damage to the Strata and the Strata does not meet, the damage doesn't meet the Strata's insurance deductible, every owner is going to repair their own unit, and the Strata is going to repair the common property, and everyone's going to go their own separate ways. And it's almost a no-fault situation. It doesn't matter if the water came from outside of your unit. As far as the Strata is concerned, everyone repairs their own unit. The Strata repairs common property. Everyone goes their own separate ways. If you want to go any further than that in making your neighbor responsible for your costs, that's going to be a conversation between you and your personal insurance broker. Now, if it is over the deductible, then the Strata's insurance is going to have a contractor come in to fix the work. The Strata is going to get a bill for the deductible amount, and then you're going to have to determine based on your bylaws who's responsible for that deductible. And it's important, especially as more and more court cases come out defining when Stratas can make owners responsible. The default does tend towards the Strata cannot make owners responsible for the deductible unless you have bylaws allowing you to charge that deductible back. So it's important, again, to get legal advice on your bylaws. Many lawyers will say update your bylaws every 3 to 5 years. Make sure that you have the bylaws that allow you to make owners responsible for water damage that emanates from their unit when that damages the common property or other units. Next, not going to touch on this too much. This is another document that we will send out after this session that just details what you can expect out of an insurance claim process, because it can be a very stressful time when your unit's been destroyed by a leak, and it is helpful to know what you can expect the process to be. But we'll move on here to the final topic, which is just about communities. We've talked about this again. You know, we've tried to hit on this over and over in this session. You live in a community. A Strata is a community, and it's up to the people in that Strata to determine what kind of community it's going to be. The Strata is a corporation, but it's also a neighborhood. No amount of bylaw enforcement or fines is going to resolve a conflict between two units who refuse to find a compromise as neighbors. No amount of money spent on high-tech security systems is going to stop thefts in your buildings if residents are leaving doors propped open unattended or being careless about people going in and out of the garage. No amount of administrative work, no amount of emails, no amount of 3-hour council meetings, 4-hour council meetings is going to help your Strata run smoothly. As smoothly as if it was a group of volunteers, a group of neighbors all working together for the best interests of the communities. It really is a work smarter, not harder situation. Often owners and council members feel that if something isn't working, that just means that they need to push harder, do more work, more hours, write more emails, more bylaw letters, spend more of the Strata's money. I've worked with many well-run buildings over the years, buildings with over $1 million saved in their CRF. And generally, those aren't the councils who are the most stressed and overworked. those are the ones who are in the fact of the least stress and often doing the least number of hours of work per week, because their community is built on a solid foundation of everyone working together for a common goal. That's a deceptively, it sounds easy. It's definitely not necessarily an easy goal to accomplish, but it's definitely an important one to keep in mind. And how do you build a community like that? Sometimes it really is as simple as getting people together. There are many things you can do to get residents together so they stop seeing each other as just faceless nuisances next door and instead see themselves as everybody, as neighbors in a community together. Anything from a fun barbecue night to a volunteer event to, people doing a cleanup day to a bottle drive day, events for the good of the community. Again, these things might seem simple. They might even seem like a waste of time. But a strata that works together as a community, not just council, but all the residents, is going to operate more efficiently. Just yesterday, I heard about a strata with 250 units that in the last 10 years has only had 2 bylaw enforcement actions. So 250 units, 10 years, only twice have they had to even threaten to find someone. And the only way that something like that happens is when the residents of the strata are seeing themselves as a community working together. All right, that brings us near the end of the time. So Kristy, if you can take us to the conclusion, please.
You betcha. So we may have generated more questions. However, as much as we want to be able to help everyone, there are other organizations out there like CHOA and VISOA that provide great resources to strata corporations and strata councils. And so we've left some information on the screen there, which will come out with the additional supplemental information. Proline Academy fills, of course, one niche, but we're well aware that there are lots of resources. And if you're really interested, UBC's Sauder School of Business offers strata management courses, so you too can become a strata property manager. Having said that, I'm so sorry for the technical glitch there, but we will spend a couple of minutes going through. I believe there are some questions. So if you do have questions, there is a Q&A function. You can pop your question in there. We will go through these really quickly if we can. The first question here is, I believe a bare land strata is different from a normal strata property. Who decides the charge of strata fee, and how can we make sure the transparency of spending? Dario, do you want to take that one?
Do you?
I sure do. So, a bare land strata is a little bit different from a typical conventional strata in that the actual buildings and homes of a bare land strata are completely within the strata lot. So there are no walls. The strata corporation typically doesn't have a building, as bare land kind of would make it sound. And so you have maybe some common roadways and some common infrastructure like lights and underground infrastructure, but the actual buildings themselves belong to the owners. And so ultimately, going back to the information around the budget and the annual general meeting, your strata corporation should be holding an AGM every year where they present the budget, which essentially informs the strata fees. And so owners should be invited to the AGM. You should vote on the budget. Assuming the budget passes as it's presented, the strata fees will be based on that budget. And moving forward, transparency essentially is governed and is lent through that budgeting process. So the budget is transparent. The budget lines should be transparent. The owner should be aware of what's going on. The strata council should be meeting on a semi-regular basis to document decisions. And that's ultimately where that transparency should come from.
Really quickly, there's a question about how many people can be on council. Check your bylaws is the answer. So at the end of the act, there's something called the standard bylaws, and those are what say between 3 to 7 people on council. But the standard bylaws are, you can change those. They're the default unless your bylaws are different. So you need to actually check your Strata's bylaws to determine what the size of council is.
Awesome. The next is our bylaws say no short-term rentals, but it turns out that key council members are themselves engaged in it and did not disclose. So Michelle, that's not great. And so in that case, I would probably write to the Strata Council and I would provide your whatever information or evidence you have of that and ask how the Strata Council intends to handle that. Your next piece was, is the only way to deal with the problem to set a special general meeting, possibly to remove them from council? That could be an option for sure. It completely depends on your Strata Corporation's bylaws. Your bylaws may provide for other ways to remove council members. For example, your bylaws might provide an opportunity for the Strata Council in a duly convened council meeting to vote to essentially remove them from council. I would say that bylaw is pretty rare, but it is out there. Otherwise, it is most likely that you would have to call a special general meeting to remove that person. And then the last one we have, oh, they're coming in now. One more, if something personal got stolen from the common area, for example, a locked bike got stolen from the bike locker station in front of the building, will the Strata insurance cover it? I can answer that.
Yeah.
And it really depends on a variety of things, but first and foremost, personal belongings are not covered by the Strata Corporation's insurance coverage. So if you have a bike under these circumstances, you may want to discuss it with your personal broker. It may be covered by your condo coverage. But beyond that, even if the Strata Corporation did cover belongings, it's unlikely that that kind of theft would be valued at a level high enough to actually go beyond the deductible threshold, thus causing triggering a claim under the Strata Corporation's coverage. And the last one here, why are owners not mandated to carry earthquake deductible insurance? In case of a disaster, we could all be affected if they cannot come up with the money for their share.
Yeah, this is definitely a tough one. The fact is that you can have a bylaw that requires owners to have earthquake insurance. The administrative work to enforce that bylaw, and actually Strata's council, your power to enforce that bylaw is very limited. And I've heard CHOA say this as well. You know, like, you're going to ask people to submit their insurance every year and fine them $200 if they don't. It's going to be very hard for that to actually work out in practice. You know, if the worst happens and an owner is unable to pay, you know, every owner is responsible for their share of the deductible, whether they have insurance or not. If they're unable to pay, that's going to be a legal question at that time. It's again, I know it's scary for a lot of people, but the Strata's mechanism for enforcing people to have insurance, there just really is no strong mechanism in the act for the Strata to enforce something like that.
Thanks, Dario. Oh, we have one more.
Why not?
In this region, the typical earthquake deductible is 15% of the replacement cost. Yes, that's correct. And so for some Strata corporations, once you kind of proportionately calculate that out per strata lot, it becomes quite expensive. I know that some owners have been having a really hard time placing insurance, particularly earthquake coverage, just because that deductible per unit cost gets quite high. Unfortunately, there is no magic answer. It's a matter of hopefully finding capacity if your personal broker doesn't have it, you can look to another broker. I know there's an organization called Insure BC that was offering additional coverage. It's tough to get. It's out there. It's just it's low. The capacity is low for it, unfortunately. We'll answer one more because there's one more.
Yeah.
Can you provide a favorite community building activity for a new strata? I know Dario has a good one.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of two that went really successfully. One we've already kind of mentioned is just simply like a barbecue, or, like food, right? Food gets people out. Have a little get together, even if it's just for an hour, whether it's in the lobby or on the front lawn, or just get people together to eat and actually talk to each other and introduce themselves. That works great. Another one that worked really, really well was a Halloween event that was, they voted on whose townhouse was decorated best for Halloween, who carved the best jack-o'-lantern, even in a condo building, who's got the best decorations on their door for Halloween. So often in stratas, I think there's so much of a focus on what you're not allowed to do, especially aesthetically. You're not allowed to change your window covering colors, and that's all well and good, but having an event where you're allowed to decorate your unit however you want, and to really kind of to get a little silly, really loosened that community up. And it really just came down to one person being willing to, put out flyers, be the judge to collect the votes for the contest. That one went really well. Again, it was like one or two volunteers who took it on them to organize the barbecue or organize these Halloween decorating contests. And those one or two volunteers ballooned into, most of the strata residents participating and having a great time. And ultimately, being more involved, higher attendance at AGMs after those events. They were great.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing, Dario. So that is all the time we have today. We have definitely gone over. Thank you so much for sticking with us. I think Catherine may have some closing comments before we wrap completely up here.
I really don't. It's just another thank you. So thanks everybody for being here. And that email with all of those documents will be coming out to you either later this week or early next week. I really appreciate all the helpful comments and questions, and have a great afternoon.